So now you've got a strategy that's trying to protect you. What does that part need from you not to have to work so hard, right?
Mm.
And that's, I think, when the healing starts to begin for a lot of people is that this awareness that the perfectionistic habit, if you will, is there trying to protect them
Mhm.
from something that they're really afraid of, probably unconsciously, and probably from some situation or conditioning earlier in life that's kind of stuck in place in the nervous system.
You are listening to the Midlife with Courage podcast. Each week, women in midlife come for inspiration, motivation, and sometimes a little education to help them flourish after 40. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Midlife with Courage. I am Kim Benoy, your host. Today, we are going to talk about a subject that I know I am very interested in. We always hear nobody's perfect, but yet we always strive for perfection. So today, my guest, Dr. Tara Cousineau, is going to talk to us about this. And welcome to the podcast, Tara.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Why don't you first just tell us where in the world you are and a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. So I'm in the greater Boston area in Massachusetts on the East Coast, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I work part-time in private practice and part-time at Harvard University's Counseling and Mental Health Service. So I feel like I'm in a little nook of the United States that has a lot of high achievers.
Definitely. So tell us a bit before we jump into perfectionism and what that all means. Can you tell us about a time in your life when you felt courageous?
Oh, a time in my life when I felt courageous. Okay, that's a good question. Honestly, I feel like every day I need to call on courage, especially during these current times.
Oh,
I would
definitely.
say this is probably going to be a general answer, but I do feel like life is so uncertain. You never know what's going to happen or the situation you're going to be in or a story that you're going to hear. And you have to call on sort of what I call sort of emotional courage, which is really compassion. But I feel like if there was a moment in my life, when I had my babies, like when you have to call on sort of resources that you don't even know that you have until you actually need them,
Sure.
and I also feel like there was actually a period in my life, in my 20s actually, before I went to graduate school, I was so active in the AIDS, HIV movement, which I feel like a lot of people don't even know about or remember. Like young people don't even know about that era.
Yeah.
But when I feel like sort of my inner activist was just really out there,
Uh-huh.
pounding the pavement, and I was young and I didn't really know what I was doing, but it was almost like I had that fearlessness that sometimes gets tempered over time. So I went like, I was my most courageous self? It was probably that period of time, but it's so funny because I feel like that gets reignited when there's
Yes.
other really big societal things that happen. We had COVID, now we have sort of this sort of change in governance that's causing a lot of uncertainty and stressors. And so I feel like my inner activist is getting ignited.
She's waking up in there, isn't she?
She's waking up. Yes.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I think that's the most unique answer I've ever had to that question. So that's
Okay.
wonderful. Yeah, thank you for that. So let's jump into this idea of perfectionism. Why is that important to you? Tell us your story.
Well, when I started writing about perfectionism, it was really in response to working with a lot of emerging adults, young adults, people sort of on the cusp of transitioning into their careers who were experiencing a lot of self-doubt and, in particular, inner critical voices or imposterism. And so I started running these workshops. One is called Overcome Perfectionism Through Self-Compassion, and the other is Befriending the Inner Critic. And I just was just hearing all of these stories and trying to find a good set of skills and tools that might be helpful in the moment for young people and young adults and especially young leaders who actually do have to forge ahead in the world. And so I just started doing these groups because everybody I was meeting was like, I want to do this, but I'm afraid to do this. Or why am I here? I'm not good enough. Or somehow it was a mistake that I even got into this position and people are going to find out that I'm a fraud. It was just relentless. I thought, oh my God, I'm in this stew of people struggling with perfectionism. And and it really is one of these things that it's a noble virtue to want to strive for excellence and to achieve and have success in life and do really meaningful work. And at the same time, you can get into this sort of rut of being afraid to take a step, right? That
Hmm.
calling on that inner courage because you got an inner critical voice that says, "Who do you think you are?"
Yeah. I can relate
Right?
to that.
Yeah. But I had that always, so in a way, when I was doing the groups, I was like, yeah, I wish I had what I'm doing now when I was 25 or 30 or 35 or 40, just like almost like every phase of life, you need to kind of really temper down that inner doubt when you're trying to do anything new or different. I mean, it just never goes away, honestly.
That inner voice is so strong in some people, and you kind of have to learn how to deal with that. So
Hmm.
how do we help deal with that?
Well, once we recognize that we all have these sort of inner critical narratives, one way or another, it's helpful just to name them. So part of the work that I do, especially in the befriending the inner critic, is like really flipping the script because most people say, I hate that voice. I ask them to turn towards it. Like, why is it there? How is it trying to help you? Is there a positive intention? And they're like, no, 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 there's nothing good about this. I want to get rid of this. And I said, yes, okay, but let's just hold out the idea that at some point in your life, you learned that being a straight A student or not making any mistakes was a way to cope with something that was difficult or scary in your life. If you could just entertain that idea, that happened a while ago and is now in your nervous system, is in your sort of mind, body, heart system. How do you feel towards it now? So it's this inner inquiry of like, oh, is my inner critical narrative, is that inner bully trying to help me? If so, how? And some young people will say, and this actually just happened 2 weeks ago, so it's so fresh in my mind, this young woman getting a master's or a PhD, at an Ivy League is
Wow.
saying, I am so stupid. Every day I
Oh,
wake
no.
up and I say, I am so stupid. And I actually really do stupid things. I mean, I thought that I couldn't even have made this up in a script, right? This is what was coming out of her. And then she gave examples. She said, this proves that what I'm doing is really stupid. And we started to kind of get to a little bit of what in like one therapy modality, internal family systems, is a little bit of unblending from that critical voice with a simple inquiry. How do you notice it in and around your body? How long has it been there? If it's trying to protect you or motivate you, how is that? And so she said, well, I need my perfectionism. I need that so that I can actually do things. It's a structure for me. And then I always ask, I'm like, well, how are you feeling in this structure? She said, I feel terrible. I'm tense. I'm nervous all the time. I'm like, perhaps it's not working for you anymore. Like it might have worked for you when you were in middle school or and got you into a good college or got you into this job. And it might have helped you along the way, but there's an accrual that happens of costs. It's kind of like, or I would say it's almost kind of like a deficit in the bank account, right? It's like it's just so costly to maintain that kind of structure and tension all the time that it's going to come and get you at some point, which is also often what happens, is that it ends up being a physical manifestation from chronic
Oh,
stress.
yeah, I've talked about that multiple times on this podcast and in real life too, if you want to call
Yes,
it that. If we don't pay attention or don't take care of our mental, our brain, what it's telling us, yeah, it absolutely tells your body, and your body does stuff you don't want.
exactly. And then I say, that's why the first question always is how do you feel this in and around your body?
Yeah.
It's just kind of making that connection between like your head and your body. And that's sometimes hard for people, especially people who identify as perfectionistic, because
Mhm.
often they've just been so shut down from their emotional states and their sensations because they're just driving, they're just compulsively moving forward that
Yeah.
they're actually not paying attention. And then what happens is, I don't know, they trip. They fall down the stairs, they get IBS, they have migraines, there's insomnia, probably all these things that you talk about on this podcast. And I'm like, oh, wow, your body's letting you know. Okay, good. That's a first step.
Yeah.
You know, you might not
Identifying it.
like it, but there's, inflammation builds up, cortisol builds up. At some point, it's going to wear you down.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, this whole habit. It's really a mind-body habit.
Yeah.
perfectionism. I say it's protection, basically. It's a
Yeah.
protective stance in life.
So what is it protecting us from?
Well, that's the inquiry, right? Ultimately, it's protecting us from actually, a client said this yesterday when I made this inquiry about a part of her that just feels like, afraid to speak up or to make a presentation. And I said, well, what is that part afraid of? And she said, well, humiliation and annihilation. And I
Wow.
said, okay, you went right to the core. Because ultimately, these fears that underlie any of sort of our coping strategies, ultimately, but perfectionism in particular, I always say is like, when you come down to it, like, okay, and if that happens, then what? And if that happens, then what? And
Uh,
it usually comes down to rejection, right? Humiliation, rejection, being kicked out of the tribe,
mhm.
or I don't belong here, death, annihilation. She actually came right to the core, and we were like, wow,
Yeah.
no wonder that part is trying to prevent you from that,
Yeah. I
right?
mean,
That's the flipping of the script.
right. I mean, the word annihilation, I mean, that is huge. That's strong. Like, and she went right to that.
Yes. So there was a part of her that was absolutely terrified of being
Sure.
exposed in some way. And now she could, kind of extract herself a little bit like, oh, no wonder, well, I'm procrastinating or I'm not getting something done or I'm waiting to the last minute because there's a part that's really trying to protect her from annihilation, right?
Yeah,
You
I would
know?
hope so.
So, okay, so now you've got a strategy that's trying to protect you. What does that part need from you not to have to work so hard, right?
Mm,
And then that's, I think, when the healing starts to begin for a lot of people is that this is this awareness that the perfectionistic habit, if you will, is there trying to protect them
mhm.
from something that they're really afraid of, probably unconsciously, and probably from some situation or conditioning earlier in life that's kind of stuck in place in the nervous system.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna, that was the next thing I was gonna ask about because this has to come from somewhere. And I know, okay, I'll get a little bit vulnerable here. I always felt this need to be accepted and noticed. And so I tried to do the best in school and get the
Hmm.
best grades. And so is it something like that where you have that need to just be noticed or accepted or saying, oh, you're
Yeah,
valuable?
absolutely. And it's so primal. It really, it's like a survival
Yeah.
strategy. I often say when people start like tuning into the part, like, I say, well, how long has this part been around? And sometimes people will say, oh, well, forever since I've been born. I'm like, well, can you think of a time when this really sort of got activated? And often it's in middle school.
Oh,
You
that's
know?
a horrible year, or years, I should say.
Yeah, those 3 years are really, really
Oh,
tough. Or it could be when you're starting college, or, I'm thinking about somebody recently in midlife. Well, what do you consider midlife, Kim, actually? Do you have like an age range?
I always say like 35 and over. I mean, usually 40 and over, but I kind of group 35 just because like perimenopause can
Yeah,
start
totally.
in mid
So,
30s.
yeah, good. So was an older student, if you will, in a recent perfectionism workshop. And she could only come to the first one, so she skipped a couple and then she showed up a couple times later. And she said, I didn't realize until you explained that perfectionism is a form of protection that I have actually been doing that for so many years. She goes, even since, I was a teenager. And she goes, in the last 3 weeks, I stopped wearing makeup.
Oh, interesting.
Exactly. So I paused then. She's like, I realized that I've always been trying to present myself as buttoned up, put together because I was supposed to, or that's how I was going to be accepted. And she goes, and I turned to my husband. I'm like, why am I doing this? And she's
Mm,
actually, I think in terms of sort of standards would be considered an attractive human being. And she's, I just stopped wearing makeup. And it was almost kind of like I wanted to do like the little cheerleading thing for her right then and there, but I wanted to see what the other students would say too, because the girl who kept saying that she felt like she was stupid was actually in that sort of Zoom room. And I thought, wow, that one recognition that your strategy for wanting to be presentable to the world is a way to protect yourself from something like, and I'm
mhm.
not her therapist. This is just kind of in a psychoeducational workshop, but I'm really happy for her because I feel like that was an internal shift. And now
Sure.
she's going to be more sort of self-aware in her case about sort of self-presentation,
Hmm.
perfectionism. There's many different types of, perfectionism, but in that particular domain. So yeah, that is where it comes from, Kim, is that we want to
Yeah.
fit in and we don't want to get kicked out of the tribe.
No, of course not. No one wants that. That's, yeah. But
Yeah.
I think sometimes, I mean, it takes us years to figure that out. And obviously to have some help would be great with that, like what you provide. You said you work with normally younger group, but do you work with women in midlife a little bit
So
too?
I work with people from 18 to, I think my oldest client now is in her mid 70s.
Oh,
And
okay.
I work in particular in my private practice with women. I always have. I mean, because
Sure.
actually women are the ones that come to get help, right? For the most part. I wish actually more men would come for help, but in general, women I think are more amenable to coming in for counseling or coaching or psychotherapy. So mostly women, a lot of parents, a lot of moms,
Yeah.
who are trying to do everything, cook, clean, have a
Hmm.
job, get their kids,
I can't relate to that at
yeah.
all.
I know. I have to say, I feel most proud that I have two young adult daughters and I made it through and they're good
Right?
human beings. I feel like it's my biggest achievement in life.
Yeah, I say the same thing. Yep. They're upright and breathing and we're all good. Yeah. So yay,
Exactly.
yay me. But I find a lot of women in midlife, they will change careers or they'll try something new. Does that kind of fit into this a little bit? Do you feel? Or
In
maybe
terms of
they're,
perfectionism,
yeah, I'm just trying to connect those two a little bit, just with midlife women.
well, I think with midlife women, my experience is that when you're done with those sort of caretaking years, if you're not necessarily caught in this sandwich situation of having to do the caregiving for older adults, that women often really, I feel like, come to life in
Yeah,
their 40s and 50s.
that's
You
a great way
know,
to put it. Yes.
it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I can shed this. Well, I've had to put all my time and attention for so long, and now I can do something different and new. And that takes a ton of courage because you're
Yeah.
really going against the grain or the habits that you've been in for life. So I feel like there's often an awakening that happens in midlife, and it's
Yeah.
and it's really wonderful. But you have to then, what then also happens is those inner critical voices really get activated. They really do. They get
Yeah.
loud.
What will they say if I start, I don't know,
Yeah,
painting or whatever it happens to be,
right.
or, switching around? Because one of the other things that I kind of picked up from your information too in your website is defining success a lot of times is reinforced that definition or what we think to be successful is like reinforced by but society. But that's always changing too.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think what's changed is the intensity, right? So
Oh,
I do think that we have these unrealistic ideals and standards for beauty, body, attractiveness, success, money,
hmm.
wealth, status. I don't think that's ever actually gone away. I
Yeah.
think what has happened is it's been amplified through social media. We've now habituated ourselves to followers and ratings and rankings. And so now our
Yeah.
brains are just really attuned to that, where I don't think we were as attuned to that sort of social approval as much as we might be now. I mean, I actually think it's particularly hard for women. Like, I feel like I am a little bit of a, I don't know, middle to, I don't know, whatever, my third act
Third,
where I am
yeah.
in my life, of like around aging, because, where I'm feeling that much more. And I was a body image researcher. I was helping girls and women,
Mm,
I was on the Dove self-esteem board for a number of years. And, and it was just really about helping girls, and women have self-worth, right? And self-esteem. I mean, that was the whole
right.
point of their initiative. And now that I'm at sort of a different age bracket, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not even really around beauty as much as it is around aging,
Mm,
where I feel that the messages are just, now I'm attuned to those messages.
sure, sure.
And I think that it's like a new challenge, right? So maybe going back to your very first question, I'm like, okay, more as a moment of courage. I feel like I need to actually pull on some courage now to say, okay, why don't I let my next decade be the best decade?
Yeah.
Why not? I've
Yeah.
earned it at this point,
Right?
and not
Yeah.
get caught by this, like, oh, you're too old, or you should have done that, or, what the inner chatter is about.
Yeah. I feel like the women that I've talked to, maybe just the women I've talked to, but we kind of have this almost a little attitude. Well, oh, you're going to tell me that I'm too old? Huh, watch. I'm going to do this and this and this. I mean, that's what I want women to say,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Me too. I do think that we can't help it. Like, I think that's the other message that when it comes to high achievement or perfectionism or wanting things to go in a certain way is that it's not our fault, because the messages are about, well, if you're going to make that change, you better be good at it,
Oh,
in some
yeah.
way, right?
Yep.
Or you're going to take that risk. Well, let's see if that's going to happen. So,
Right.
and so I think that when the voices of self-doubt arise, I feel like the way to flip the script on that is like, oh, there must be something that's really important to you. Therefore, the voices are getting activated. Turn towards them with whatever that part of you needs or needed before, like reassurance,
Mhm.
help, like, reach out. And sometimes I say like the inner critic is like a heart palpitation. It's just like an internal signal that
Yeah.
there's something scary or important to you, or there's a shift happening, and like, oh, let me pay attention to this,
Oh.
but not get caught up in it.
That's a great way to think of it. That really is. Like just to flip it around a little bit. I love that. I love that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
we do have to flip the scripts.
Yeah. I'm reading a book and this is going off a little bit, but about yourself and your higher self, and your higher self
Mhm.
sends you messages and you need to start listening to them because they're really hard sometimes to hear.
Yes.
But I'm wondering if that inner critic is kind of a little bit of a manifestation of that idea,
Well,
maybe.
yes, I do. There is a spiritual practice, and even in my book, I bring in some energy medicine, energy psychology, because I'm always on the fringe, actually, I think of things. And I think, oh, what are my colleagues going to think of me? I'm like, no, because energy
Stop.
psychology and energy medicine is so important. There's a whole metaphysical aspect to this. And
Mhm.
our higher self, divine source, whatever you want to name it, has
Mhm.
always been there. It just gets obscured, or, kind of
Yes.
the curtains get shut over that part of you, or that your essence, essentially, because of our upbringing, our conditioning, these external voices. And so it's really important to find practices in your daily life to tune in, to first calm
Yeah.
your nervous system, right? If the nervous
Right.
system can get calm in some way, which is, I think, something that you talk about on your podcast,
Hmm.
the importance of calming the nervous system, because then your mind is clear
Right.
and you can tune in and hear the voice. Because I think that there are downloads that happen. When I wrote my first
Exactly.
book, I felt like it was a download. Like, literally, I was like a dream in the middle of the night that was like, Tara, you have to write this book on kindness, and it's going to be called The Kindness Cure. Like, it was a
Oh, I love
download.
it.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And
you
you have
know?
to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's just kind of listening to that inner voice, and then being mindful that there are going to be other voices that are conditioned responses to life. Like, I just call them inner algorithms,
Yeah.
that those are going to percolate up, and that you can tend to them because they're just agitations. They're internal agitations.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Like stirring it up.
Yeah.
Listen, listen.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you brought up your book. So tell us about your new book. Is that
Yes.
out yet? Is it out
Yes,
now?
it's recent.
Yeah.
It is my second book. It's called The Perfectionist Dilemma: Learn the Art of Self-Compassion and Become a Happy Achiever. And in large part, it's based on these workshops that I've been doing for the last, I don't know, 6 years or so, with stories and, little vignettes of people kind of struggling with certain kinds of inner critical voices. And, I've been a therapist for 25 years. And so I feel like I've sort of like distilled down the common inner critical voices. So in the book, I write about 5 archetypes in my mind, which
Wow.
is the inner judge, the inner bully, an inner detective, leaving no stone unturned, the inner nitpicker, which I really have an inner nitpicker,
Me
and a
too.
joy, yeah, and a joy thief, the part of you that doesn't let you relax or have fun. And when we can identify that, oh, we've got these narratives, they have little personas in a way, then we can start to work with those personas.
Mhm.
And that's when a lot of the tools and the strategies, what I call my happy achiever tools in the book, can sort of help with that sort of perfectionistic inner critical voice, whatever your flavor is, right? Because people have really different ways of of
Yeah,
managing, sort of the never good enough elements.
right.
So, so the book is kind of like a little guide. It's like a how-to, and it was really fun to write because a lot of the stories were sort of composites of actual stories of
Hmm.
of people that I've worked with and how they worked through them. So, and
Yeah.
mine too, actually. I kind of start and end with my little story on perfectionism.
Okay, wonderful. And where can we find you if we want to get the book or if we want to learn more?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my website, taracousineau.com, or the book has its own little website called, it's basically perfectionistdilemma.com. And you can scroll down the homepage and there are free tools, some little videos of, certain methods, like energy medicine methods and, just guides, worksheets, trackers on how to kind
Sure.
of notice that inner critical voice and what tools work for you. So that's all there. And I also have a new publication on a platform called Substack, and it's called The Peaceful Perfectionist, where I'm just going to keep up with the writing because writing the book was one thing, but now I want to actually communicate and correspond with people. So I'm using that
Ah,
as my new vehicle, and it's been really fun. I've only been on that for 2 months. So if you're a Substack user or would be
yeah.
interested in my newsletter, it's called The Peaceful Perfectionist.
I love that. The peaceful perfectionist.
Yes.
That's nice. I like to ask my guests before we go if there's one last little thing that they want to share. I don't know if there is something you want to share from the book, maybe one thing our listeners can take with them today if they're struggling with perfectionism. What's like one thing they can do, or if you want to share something totally different. It's totally up to you before we say goodbye.
So self-compassion is in the subtitle. And what is self-compassion? It's really the sort of combination of being mindful, not judging the present moment, just noticing that's happening, knowing that you're not alone. I think that is a really important thing, that you're not alone as a perfectionist or in your habits, and to really talk to yourself like you would a friend. And I think that's a really hard thing for people to do, especially women. I mean, they'll give all the compassion in the world to their family and people around them, but not to themselves. And so I would say practice self-compassion. I mean, the book has many different ways to practice self-compassion. I do think the easiest hack, though, for that is to notice that part, like give it a name. Like I have a feisty, self-righteous part that I call Scarlet. Because she can just get like really like red hot with indignation, right? I've had that
Ah,
part since I've been 3, 5 years old. And like really in uncertain times, that part also just comes forward where I just feel like, oh, and I want to like, I've got my fists in my hands and, I'm like, oh, Scarlett, okay. I know this is so hard. Like just validate the feelings like, ouch, this hurts or this is really hard. And then so I just
yeah,
kind of direct sort of that love and kindness towards that part of me and say, it's going to be okay. I'm here for you. You've got this. And so I'd say, that inner critical voice that's inside you is actually a younger part of you that arose at a time in your life when you had less coping skills than you might now. Turn towards that part and, be a friend to it. Be your own best friend in that way.
yeah. That's amazing. Well, Dr. Tara, thank you so much for everything you're doing. I think your book itself would be a great tool to help women in midlife kind of go back and learn how to show themselves self-compassion, which is what I'm trying to do here too. So,
Yes.
so yeah, so listeners, go to her website, say the website again.
Oh, Tara Cousineau. So Tara, Cousineau, COUSINEAU.com, or just look up the book, The Perfectionist Dilemma, because you probably will land on my website or on the book's website. And an
Wonderful.
audio now, actually, recently.
Oh,
There's an
nice.
audio version. Yeah.
Did you read it or did someone else read it?
No, the company had professional narrators because apparently, according to focus groups, that like your friends and family, the 150 people in your tribe would like to hear your voice, but
Yeah.
everybody else in the world doesn't know who you are. And so having it professionally read is actually better
Oh.
according to focus groups. So I feel conflicted over that, to be honest with
Yeah.
you.
So I was gonna say you have a really nice voice. I think you could do a really good job at
Oh,
it. So
yeah, thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So I've actually talk about a moment of courage, kind of like almost like having to let go and
Ah,
give in
sure.
and say, okay, but my voice is on my meditations, which
Ah,
you can find on my Substack and also,
okay.
on my website. So, sometimes we have to
Wonderful.
compromise.
Yes, we do. We sure do.
Yes.
Well, Tara, thank you so much for talking with me today. I feel like we could just keep going. But yeah, but maybe we'll have you on again another day.
Oh, would love that. I have plenty of tools if you ever
Okay.
need me.
Yeah, I'm checking those out. So,
Well, Kim, it's been a pleasure. Thank you
all
so
right.
much.
Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife with Courage podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you would leave me a review. Or even better, send a link of this episode to a friend. Until next time, take care of your beautiful self.